Alright, so we're going to look at section 2.6, which is radical equations. This is a little bit tricky, so let's go through these and look at some of these slides. We're going to solve radical equations, and then we're going to solve equations with rational exponents, which means the exponents are fractions. So we have this first equation, x equals negative 3, and it's basic. It is its own solution. But if you squared both sides, you would get x squared equals 9. Now, this would be solved by either factoring. You could say x squared minus 9 equals 0, and then you would get x plus 3 times x minus 3 as your two factors. Or you could take the square root of both sides. And when you take the square root of an x squared, we have to remember that you get that plus or minus, and so you get that second solution. So when you're solving radical equations, you first isolate the radical expression on one side of the equation, and then you raise both sides of the equation by the power necessary to undo the radical. In other words, if it's a square root, you're going to square both sides. If it's a cube root, you're going to cube both sides. If it's a fourth root, you'll raise both sides to the fourth power. Whatever it takes to make that side under the radical not be under a radical anymore. And then you'll simplify and just solve. Sometimes you have to do that twice in an equation. We'll probably have a few of those examples. Then you have to check your answers to make sure that they work. Like we picked up that extra solution when we kind of did this in that one example in the first part. Sometimes both answers don't work. You can get two answers, and sometimes both will work, but sometimes they won't. So you have to check your answers in case there are what we call extraneous solutions. So let's look at these first couple, and we're going to solve them. And I'm going to walk you through these one at a time. So let me start by kind of covering over these B and C, and then we'll work A. So we're going to isolate the radical. What that means is we get the radical by itself. So we're going to leave the square root of 1 minus x here, and we're going to add 1 to both sides. So that equals x plus 1. Now we're going to have to square both sides. So when we square both sides, we have this quantity x plus 1 squared. Now when you square a square root, it just lifts the radical. So this on the left becomes 1 minus x. Squaring a square root is very easy. But in this case, what we have is we have x plus 1 times x plus 1, and so we have a quadratic when we multiply that out. So that's going to end up being x squared plus 2x plus 1 when I multiply it out. Now you're going to add x here and subtract 1. Okay. And so this will all be equal to 0 on the left. And you'll have x squared plus 3x, and the 1's add to be 0. All right, so now we've got a quadratic. We have to factor it. First step in factoring, if you can, is the greatest common factor. So we'll factor out an x, and we're left with x plus 3. Now there's two solutions. There's two values of x that would make this right side equal 0. And that is the first one, x equals 0. And for the factor, it would be x equals negative 3. And then we have to check both of them. So we're going to go back, and over here to the right, we'll check. Okay? So we'll go over here, and we'll say check. Okay? And so first we'll use our 0. We'll have the square root of 1 minus 0 equals, minus 1 equals 0. We put a 0 in for all the x's. Square root of 1 minus 1 equals 0. Well, the square root of 1 is 1. So this one checks. The 0 is a good answer. Now let's look at negative 3. We have 1 minus a negative 3 minus 1 equals negative 3. This is the square root of 1 plus 3 minus 1 equals negative 3. And that's the square root of 4, which is 2, minus 1 equals negative 3, or 1 equals negative 3. That doesn't end up with a true statement, so the negative 3 is not a good answer. We only have one answer that will work and give us a correct solution. Okay, so let's look at their solution. Okay, so they isolated, they squared both sides, did the same thing we did, and then when they check again, they find that the 0 works, but the negative 3 does not. Okay, so negative 3 is an extraneous solution, and the solution set is just the 0. Now let's look at this next equation. Let's solve it. This is one where you're going to have to square root twice. So I'm going to walk you through it. First, you're going to get one variable on one side. We're going to leave this square root of x plus 1, and that's going to equal 1 minus the square root of x plus 2. Now this is going to be much harder to do. We're going to square both sides again. Okay. On the left, it's easy. It's just x plus 1. But what on the right? Let's look at that, because that's going to be a lot more of a challenge. We're going to have 1 minus the square root of x plus 2 times 1 minus the square root of x plus 2. Okay? Now we're going to FOIL this. So 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times negative square root of x plus 2 is negative square root of x plus 2. Now we're going to distribute this second part. So that's again another square root of x plus 2. And then we have the square roots multiplied together. Well, negative times negative is positive. Square root times square root is no square root anymore. So we have x plus 2 without the square root symbol. So you can see why this is a little bit of a challenge to multiply this. So let's look at on the left we still have our x plus 1. Now what do we have on the right? We have 1 plus 2 at the very end is a 3. Then we have a plus x and minus 2 times the square root of x plus 2, because there's 2 of those square root of x plus 2's there. Now we're going to subtract our x and subtract our 3. So we end up with just the square root of x, the square root part on the right. So we're going to subtract x and subtract 3. So those add to be 0. X is over on the left, add to be 0. So we have negative 2 equals negative 2 times the square root of x plus 2. Now you can divide by negative 2 on both sides. It's easier to divide usually if you can. So this becomes, those cancel, and this becomes a positive 1 equals the square root of x plus 2. Now we're going to square both sides again. And we have x plus 2 equals 1. And so subtract 2 from both sides. So negative 1 equals x, if we did our work right. Now we have to check and see if that's a good solution or not. So again, remember you always have to check these. And we're going to check negative 1. So we have the square root of negative 1 plus 1 plus the square root of negative 1 plus 2 equals 1. So negative 1 plus 1 is 0. That's the square root of 0, which is 0. Square root of 1 equals 1. And so square root of 0 is 0, square root of 1 is 1. That does check out to be a good answer. So x equals -1 is a good answer for us. But that was a lot harder to do, that second multiplication, or that multiplication with that radical in it. So I hope that helped you understand how to do those kind of problems. We'll go through and look at their solution. Okay, so we did both things. Same. I showed you how to multiply that out, so hopefully that helps. They got a positive 2 because they moved the radical over and made it positive and moved everything else over to the right. Got the same answer, and so x is -1, and then they checked. And so the solution set is x equals -1. All right, the last example, we've got something raised to the 4th power. So when we work that, we're undoing a 4th power instead of a square root. So first we're going to move this -2 over here. So you're going to have a 4th root of x squared plus 8x plus 7 equals 2. Now we have to raise everything to the 4th power to undo the... So a 4th root to a 4th power lifts the radical. You have x squared plus 8x plus 7. 2 to the 4th is 16. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. Now we're going to bring everything and set that equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 16. So this side's equal to 0. So we have x squared plus 8x minus 9 and that equals 0. Okay, we're going to see if we can factor it. This sign being negative tells me I have a plus and a minus in my factor. X times x will give me x squared. And so positive 9 and -1 will multiply to be -9 and add to be positive 8. So the answers, remember, are what makes the factor equal 0. So the answer is going to be x equals -9. That's the value that makes the factor equal 0. And this one is x equals positive 1. So we have -9 and positive 1 that we need to check. So we're going to go over here to our check. Okay. The 4th root of 1 squared plus 8 times 1 plus 7 minus 2 equals 0. Okay, 4th root of 1 plus 8 plus 7, that's 16, minus 2 equals 0. Well, we already said that 2 to the 4th power is 16, so the 4th root of 16 is 2, and that does equal 0, 2 minus 2. So 1 is a good answer. We're okay with 1. We need to check the -9. So let's erase that check. And check our -9. So we want the 4th root of -9 times -9 is positive 81. -9 times 8 is -72. Plus 7, then minus 2 equals 0. So the 4th root, 81 minus 72 is 9. 9 plus 7 is 16. So we have the 4th root of 16 again, which is 2. Minus 2 equals 0. So actually the -9 checks also to be a good answer. So both of those answers will work to solve this equation. Okay. So let's go back and see what they do. Raising to the 4th power, solve by factoring, check your answers. They both work, so both are solutions, -9 and 1. Alright, this is just a word problem where they give you the formula, so you have to identify your variables and plug them in. Speed required for an object to escape from the gravitational pull of a planet is called the escape speed of the planet. The escape speed is given by the equation VE, which is the escape speed, is equal to square root of 2. G is the universal gravitational constant. M is the mass of the planet. And R is the radius of the planet. Solve the equation for R. So, we're following the same procedures, but there's no numbers in there. There's just letters. So we're going to square both sides. And so we'll get V squared is equal to 2gm over R. To lift the radical. Now we want to solve for R, so you're going to multiply both sides by R and then divide back by the VE squared. And you've got your solution for R. Alright, now this is rational exponents. Rational exponents are exponents that are fractions. And what you have to know about exponents that are fractions is that the bottom number is the root. So this number here on the bottom is going to go up in the crook of the radical symbol. That is your root. It could be a third root, a fourth root, a fifth root. If it's a square root, it's not usually written. So if there's nothing written here, then it will be a square. N is a 2. And M is a power. It's raised to the power. So you can see it could be the nth root of a to the m power, or the nth root of a, parentheses, all of that to the m power. Those are equivalent expressions. And I usually tend to do it this way when I solve problems. And we'll have some examples. So let's move on. Okay, so solve the following equations with rational exponents. The way you solve an equation, whenever we solve for x or y or whatever, we want just an x. Well, that's x to the first power. And so the way you get something to the first power is you multiply by the reciprocal of the fraction. So first thing we're going to do here is we're going to move this 9 over, and we're going to have x to the 2/3 power equals 9. Okay. Now we're going to raise this to the reciprocal power, which is 3 over 2. And we're going to raise this to the 3 over 2 power. Now remember, when you have parentheses to a power, you multiply. So on the left we have x to the 6 over 6, which is the same as just x. Okay? Now on the right, this is the square root because that's a 2, and this is the third power. Okay, so what you can write that then is the square root of 9 raised to the third power. That's 9 to the 3/2 power. Well, the square root of 9 is 3 cubed, and so x then is equal to 27. Okay, and then you can double check. The cube root of 27 is 3. 3 squared is 9. 9 minus 9 is 0. Okay, looking at this next problem, all of that's raised to the 1/4 power. So I want to raise everything to the 4th power. I want to take this and raise it to the 4th power and raise the 3 to the 4th power. So that means that all of this is this quantity in parentheses to the 4 over 4, or to the first. So now I've got 32x squared minus 32x plus 17 is equal to 3 to the 4th, which is 81. Then I'll have 32x squared minus 32x is equal to, and 17 minus 81, or 81 minus 17 is 64. So it's minus 64 equals 0. Now I can divide everything by 32. I can factor out a 32. So if I divide everything by 32, I end up with x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. And that will factor as x plus and x minus. And it'll be 2 and 1. Multiplies to be negative 2 and adds to be negative 1. So my answers are negative 1 and positive 2. Then you have to double check and see if they work. And I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna just let them show the check on their already printed slide. But that's how you would go about solving that type of problem. So let me clear the slide and we'll move on. And you can see they're going to show you that they get the same thing as we did for this one. Okay. And they get plus or minus 27. Both are solutions. Then on this one, raising it to the 4th power, you get 2 and negative 1, and both work. I did not check it, but both work. And that's the end of 2-6.